Rebecca, please tell me about how you came to choose passing for your directorial debut.
Yeah, how did I choose it? That's it. I don't know that I did choose it to be my directorial debut, honestly. It was in fact, I thought for a very long time it couldn't be. I came across the book a long time ago, at a time when I was thinking a lot about my personal history of African American white passing in my family. And my mother's side, she was born in Detroit, Michigan, and her father was white passing, and probably his parents were white passing. I never knew him, sadly. I sort of use phrases like white passing very confidently now, which is sort of funny because for most of my life, there was no language for this. And it was just a series of conversations that were difficult to have, unanswered questions. And as someone who is the sort of end point in that line, I guess, I found myself being increasingly more quizzical about the truth. And when I got handed this book, it gave me a historical framework to put my grandfather in, honestly, and to think about the choices that he made or was forced to make, or and how complicated it is, and also reflect on the legacy of passing in a family, what it means, and what, in many ways, it's sort of like the kind of, this is a story about race in America, yes, of course it is, but it's a story about many things. And it's a story about the sort of small, quiet ways that living within a racist framework plays out on your perception of yourself, your interpersonal relationships, and the sort of knock-on effect of that can be very small and very large. And I don't go through the world as a Black person. I don't experience racism like that because of how I present. But I do have an experience of those other things that I'm talking about and that the book talks about. And also the sort of broader term effect on how we shape our identity is shown in this book. I mean, it's this sort of, I think it really shows how it's this constant negotiation between a narrative that we are choosing to tell about ourselves and put out into the world and perform, and one that other people are, and the sort of balance between those two to forge it. And that then it becomes about so many other things. It becomes about gender, race, sexuality, class. That's Nella Larsen's brilliance, is it unpacks all these things. Now, to go back to the original question, is that, why was this my first film? For all the reasons that I just said, I was fairly sure it absolutely wouldn't be.
Why is that? I mean, those to me, those sound like things that would make it so acute. So
it was too acute, I think. It was too acute and it was too personal for my 25-year-old brain to handle. I read the book. I didn't understand my relationship to it. I was so moved. I had such a strong feeling of, I don't even know what the word is, because it's sort of relating, yes, emotion, yes, sympathy, yes, empathy, yes, to these women. And I didn't really understand it. And my only way of really trying to unpack all that was to write a screenplay about it, selfishly, so I could spend more time with it. And as I was writing the screenplay, it became very obvious to me how I would shoot the film. I started daydreaming about it. I was like, well, there would be these shots, and, these two characters would be in the frame as much as possible together. I'd save all the close-ups for more objective moments. It would be black and white. It should be 4:3 because that concentrates the frame on the face and makes it about how people look at you and how you look at people. And it's not about anything else. Everything else is superfluous. But it was, I had all these thoughts at 25, but it was very scary to me because I was like, well, it would be a tremendous act of arrogance to make your first film a highly conceptual black and white movie about deeply nuanced things that I am still trying to get my head around. And I think the truth is it took me time and to gain the confidence to understand that filmmaking is an act of arrogance, and you should just make the one that you know how to make, you know, and not mess around with anything else. And so it became very clear to me that this was the only one I wanted to make as my first film.
No, you're absolutely right. That's well put. Filmmaking is an act of arrogance. And,
yeah.
and one I'm grateful for. But yeah, it absolutely is.
Me too. Yeah.
Yeah. Tessa, were you familiar with the book before you saw the script?
No, I hadn't read it. I read the novella right before I read the script, and was really struck by both, like just haunted by Nella Larsen's work, and also that I didn't have a relationship with it, that the book wasn't something that was talked about really. And then I was just struck by how Rebecca was able, with such economy and grace and poignancy, to adapt this piece. You know, both plucking directly from Larsen's work and also clearly trying to contend with questions around her own family legacy. And I thought that the combination of those two on paper created this world that felt so immediate and urgent. And yeah, I couldn't shake it. It really, really stuck to my bones. And if I'm honest, I still can't shake it, having lived inside of the world of the piece for a while.
And what about you, Ruth? Had you read it? Had you read the novella?
Yeah, I'd read it. I'd read it in my early 20s, I think. And I completely fell in love with it. I think it's a masterpiece. I couldn't believe that it wasn't more well known. I just immediately developed this fascination with the idea of passing and what it meant, and the history of passing, and that it's such a taboo subject that no one talked about. And people, you know, it was a scary option for a lot of people, and I think some people felt they had no choice. And what struck me was the psychological cost of it, you know, because passing is essentially loss. You're losing your community, because it's a community affair, isn't it? Really, it's sort of like
sure.
You're asking a lot of people to conspire with you, and I just to have to cut off ties like that, a severing of one's past. I mean, I just thought, gosh, that's a severing of oneself, and just so intrigued by the idea of having to live with that. You know, and what struck me was, this incredible thirst that Clare has, and this longing she has for her community, for her family, and the danger that incurs when she wants to return, you know. I thought, gosh, why did people have to live like that? You know, I mean, it's incredible, isn't it? How much, no matter how we desire to live, there's always so many other factors that conspire against us.
Well, I mean, to getting back to what Rebecca was saying about it, you know, feeling so acute. Now that, you know, in 2021, you know, it's like the subject matter seems more acute than ever. I mean, the novella is almost a century old now, right? And but it seems just as timely and important. I'm curious, when were you shooting the film, and was your perspective on it altered by the events of 2020, especially in regards to Black Lives Matter?
I was editing remotely and was still editing when the Black Lives Matter protests started happening in their full force during that summer. So it had an effect on me. I mean, I can't really, I'm not sure that I can articulate exactly it fully in relation to the film, because that feels a bit too easy in a way, but it had an effect, right. Environment in which I was editing.
In terms of getting through the last, in terms of the last year, was there any person or community that gave you a sense of strength?
In terms of the last year, yes. I mean, speaking about Black Lives Matter, that is not just a hashtag, of course, also an organization that was birthed now almost 8 years ago. So, so in a way, and obviously was birthed out of something that has always been true in America, which is that Black bodies are not safe and are not valued. And it's a movement. Again, we have been talking more recently about the value and dignity of Black life. This is not a new conversation. So for me personally, I don't feel like the events in the wake of George Floyd necessarily changed the feeling about the movie. I think that urgency around having conversations about race, the thing that Irene, by the way, refuses to do inside of the film, is the very reason why I wanted to make this film and want to continue, at least for me in the work that I do, to have these conversations, to create opportunities for audiences to have these conversations as well. And I think what's been heartening for me when you speak about community, there are so many people, some of those folks are the folks that are on the ground doing the work. Like I, feel really grateful to have, cultivated a relationship with Patrice Cullors this past year, and to be organizing with people inside of Hollywood and beyond, and then to look to people, like authors in the writing space. Like I've read Kiese Lemon's book Heavy, and that book, in the same way that Nella's work stuck to me, that stuck to me. And then to know that he has a relationship with passing because his mother made him read that book, and he's looking forward to this conversation, to watch this film and to engage with this work in this way through this prism. And so I think the folks that have really comforted me the most this past year have been Black artists working, and to know that we're inside, I think, of yet another renaissance, and a time hopefully where Black voices are centered. And so I think that's been like the solve, I think. And hopefully, I think something that I have seen happen, at least, is in the wake of Black Lives Matter, there's this urgency now on a corporate level, in a studio level, to be able to react to that time, right? And so I hope that this is not a moment, this is a movement, and I hope it creates more room and opportunity for Black voices and Black stories to be centered, and all kinds of Black stories. Obviously, this is one very specific one, but I think we need to be able to exist not as a monolith, but as the fully realized, in the fully realized variety that we as Black people exist in.
I couldn't say it better than Tessa. I would echo that. It's about visibility, it's about the opportunity, and I can't say it better than Tessa. I feel like I think I feel like there's no hiding anymore, and I don't think that this is just a moment. I don't feel we can press rewind or stop. You can't hold the tide back with a broom, and I think that this is what's happening, and it's astonishing to witness and to be part of this film right now. It's incredibly moving.
At the risk of spoilers, I have to ask about the ending scene. I'm not going to be any more specific about that because of spoilers, but I would love to know what went into the blocking and staging of that, and at the party at the window, because that's just like it was actually a real luxury for me to have it on my computer, because that meant I could freeze it and go back and go forward and try to figure out exactly what happened how. And I love the fact that it's like, it's not entirely clear, but I would love to know what that process was like.
I thought about it a lot. I mean, I think one of the more bolder aspects of the book, and I don't want to leave spoilers, but it allows for not just ambiguity with its ending, because I think that is almost too simplistic. It allows for all possibilities to exist. For me, and I always thought it was important that all possibilities are true, and that posed a problem to me as a filmmaker, because I was like, well, how am I going to, when film is so specific in telling you exactly what has happened with what you choose to look at, how do I hold the possibility that all of these things could have happened? So yes, I sort of went back to old films and thought about more frenetic, but also sort of, you know, where's the line where not seeing what happens gives you something, and where it's just frustrating. I kept sort of thinking about that, and so it was a sort of balancing act of just giving enough pieces of something to hold a lot. But also, it's really you know, the choice to not really see anything is the trick, and leave as much of it to the imagination as possible. But yeah, it was fairly specific. It was fairly specific in terms of where you had to stand, and the room, and the organizing of everyone coming in, and the various different portals and movements. I mean, André, you had to, like, you know, shift from one space to this space and then be in that space. It was kind of, you know, sometimes what I'm sure felt a little bit unmotivated, but I was like, I need you to be in this area over here. And it was, yeah, and it was complicated, and we had one night to shoot all that. So that was terrifying. I remember that being actually the more terrifying day of the entire shoot, was my panic that I wouldn't get enough pieces to sell that moment. And
you did for sure. You did for sure.
Thank you.
André, and I apologize for not having gotten to you before, but you weren't in frame, and I didn't know you were there. I would love to know about your character in the film, because it feels like his perspective is very different than his wife's.
Yeah, I think I feel like I really connected to his perspective on a personal level. I really understood where he was coming from. Especially, I don't have children myself, but I think that his intense desire to protect his children, to keep his children safe, and that feeling of this sort of lack of ability to do that in this country is something that really made a lot of sense to me. Also that longing, that sense of longing, you know, to be free and to be seen. You know, he spoke about BLM and this moment and this movement, and I think, you know, in large part, that's what people are saying. You know, it's just expressing this desire to be seen fully and respected. So yeah, it really meant a lot to me to be a part of it and get a chance to play Brian.
Well, what's interesting to me is that he seems like somebody who's trying to deal with things as they are, in a way that the women in their own ways are not. You know, but, you know, one is passing, and another one is just like, as you know, not wanting to hear about the horrible things that are happening to Black people. And it was, I mean, it was interesting. It's like, what voice did you feel like you were giving to the film? Because it was a very different voice than the two protagonists.
Well, I mean, I'd love to hear Rebecca's thoughts on that, but for me, it felt like, you know, he's been living so long and so closely with this knowledge of what he's had to give up in order to get by. And I don't think he's been able to put that part of himself away quite yet. And so, yeah, I was really interested in like seeing him wrestle with both parts of himself. So for me, it's all down to the beautiful writing that Rebecca provided us to play with.
Rebecca, for you, in terms of being a first-time filmmaker, what advice do you have for other filmmakers?
I think the key thing that I have learned as an actor, watching directors, and certainly held in my brain and then held in my gut after actually going through it, is that you can learn the lessons of cinema, you can observe the people you love, you can find the story. All these things are parts of the process, but ultimately it boils down to your relationship with a frame. And you look at it and you watch something happen within it, and you have a gut response to, is this my taste? Is this making me feel how I want to feel, or is it not? And as long as it's not, then you've got to have the bravery to keep saying no until it is. And I think that that's really the biggest lesson I've learned from doing it, is just to hold true to that North Star or that gut or whatever it is, and know that, you know, your taste is going to be your filmmaking. It's what's going to make it unique or something, because it will always be your choice and your feeling about the frame.
That sounds inherent. Does that always feel a little scary?
Yes, it's horrifying. It's the most horrifying thing I've ever done. It's incredibly exposing. It's incredibly vulnerable making. It asks so much of you, not to be swayed, not to be, you know, to provide for people, to hold people, to all these things. It's a truly like, it's the most rewarding thing I've ever done, and also the most horrifying. I found it to be emotionally wrenching and taxing and all the rest of it, but it's everything I've ever wanted to do, honestly. Like, I've never felt more utilized in a way. Like, there are so many interests that I have in life. I like to paint, I play music, I do all these things. I don't want to do any of those things as a profession, but filmmaking holds a space for all of that. And it feels like the sort of way that I've always wanted to process the world, honestly. I feel lucky I've got to here finally.
That sounds like a pretty healthy way to look at it. So I've got one last question for everybody, really quickly. What would you like to see happen to ensure that all voices get to be represented in film? What more would you like to see done? And obviously there's so much that could be done, but I'd love to hear if there's anything specific you would love to see. André, what about you?
You know, for me personally, I really believe in training, in actor training. And I think that when I look at, you know, actor training programs, I think one way that we can help is to help make sure that there is real diversity and inclusion at that level. So that's the first thing that comes to mind for me, starting from that place.
What does opportunity mean to you?
It means it's really that simple. It's just about allowing voices to be heard, you know, and finding voices, actively looking for myriad voices. And I actually, you know, I totally agree with André. I think, you know, training, that it's essential that that's everyone has an opportunity, if they so wish, to do that. I mean, it's just an opportunity to be heard and to be visible. And I do think we're progressing. I do.
Yeah, I'd like to echo all of that. Certainly, training, as André said, I think an awful lot about crews. I think about the kind of, you know, huge productions that go to cities like Atlanta, Georgia, and then are not peopled with Black people. And I think there needs to be a real responsibility if you enter a community to make sure that you're creating jobs inside of that community. I would like to see people not be so afraid to mandate change. I don't think that change happens all the time, just with time. I think sometimes creating actionable metrics around change, and specifically inclusion, shouldn't be something that we're embarrassed of. And I think I would be remiss not to mention, since we're at Sundance, to me, it's not just about the kinds of films that screen here, it's about the kind of films that also get bought and sold here, and how they get sold? Are they allowed to have international distribution? I've taken a number of films to Sundance that have had mostly all Black leads, and it was so hard to convince even the folks that bought those films that people would want to see that film in Norway or in China or elsewhere in the world. This idea that Black faces don't sell in a global space is something that just needs to be dismantled. And I would love to see at the studio level real mandates around change, real metrics, and not metrics that are, you know, pie in the sky, but are ambitious around inclusion, and more projects that are inclusive from their genesis, not as an afterthought. I think that's something that feels really important for me.